Am I ever going to do that video about likable villains? My name is Gina. I am an author, editor, publishing professional. I help you make your writing better. This question came in forever ago talking about likable villains, and I know that I responded to them and said, I've got a video about this coming up really soon. And I did post that video, and I did post other videos very similar to it in the interim, but this person said, yeah, are you ever going to do this? And so I guess I did not explicitly tie this to the fact that this will work for villains as well, even if it is working if you were doing it for other characters or you've learned it for other types of characters. We're going to talk about those three different sliders of making a character likable or making a character charismatic to the audience. And so you are going to look at their competency, their sympathy, and their proactivity. Those are the three different pieces that you are going to look at when we are talking about making a character likable and interesting. You can take a character who is truly abhorrent. We talk about Barney Stinson on How I Met Your Mother, who is a monster of a man. We talk about pirates, who are like literal just criminals top to bottom. They're not doing anything right or for the right reasons, but we adjust these sliders of likability and we make them seem really like cool and like, hey man, he's got a point. I could see why he's doing it that way. In the movie Mean Girls, all of the girls are mean. That's the point of the title, right? Like, it's not just the plastics who are mean, but Katie is also a mean girl. And Janice is also a mean girl. They are all mean to each other. That's the point of the story, which means that in some ways they are all villains. They are all antagonists to each other, and they're antagonizing each other a lot. But in some ways, they are also all the protagonist of their own story. So how do we go about making bad people relatable and likable and interesting? So yeah, we're going to talk about those three sliders. And so one of them is competency, one of them is proactivity, and one of them is sympathy. And so you think of them all as sliders or as a spectrum. So you can have somebody who is hyper competent and is really good at what they are doing or what they want to be doing, or you can have somebody who is incompetent and they are really bad at what they are doing. So in Mean Girls, Katie is really incompetent at social skills. She is not good at navigating girl world, in her words. We can also look at proactivity. She does not do a good job of trying to navigate girl world early on. She hides in the bathroom, right? So she's not proactive. She is very reactive. She doesn't know how to jump in with both feet. She kind of lets things happen to her for the first third or half of the movie. For a lot of it, she really is just like letting influences influence her and letting other people make her decisions. She jumps into the whole infiltrate the plastics thing because someone pushed a chair out in front of her and said, sit with us. And then Janice said, oh my gosh, you have to do this. Katie's not making any of her own decisions. She's very reactive. She is very malleable. But then we look at sympathy. She is very sympathetic. We all understand that feeling of, oh, I don't have any friends. Nobody is talking to me. We all have our hearts go out to the kid who's crying a little bit because they don't feel like they fit in. That is very sympathetic. We have all been the new kid someplace, either at school or in a new neighborhood or on a new job, and we have all felt that awkward, oh no, everyone is staring at me, quick, do something that's not embarrassing. We all have felt that. It's very sympathetic. And then later on, as she moves her way through the movie, she becomes very competent. She's killing it at moving through girl world. She has become very, very popular, but she is no longer sympathetic, right? We no longer identify with what she is doing. We no longer think that she is, we no longer are like, oh girl, you've gone off the deep end like this. I can't follow where you have gone. So as she becomes more proactive and she starts making her own choices, that competency shoots up really, really quickly, and sympathy drops down very, very quickly as well. You do not want to have all three of those sliders pinged to one side, because then you have a hyper competent, hyper proactive, hyper sympathetic character. And what do you need me for? Why do we have an audience for this? You've got life figured out. You also do not want them all pinged to the other side, because then we have a lazy loser who isn't getting anything done and doesn't even want to get anything done. That's not sympathetic. We don't like being around this person. We don't want to watch their story unless they do something to try to fix their situation. This all applies to villains. Again, in Mean Girls, they are all villains to some degree. None of them are innocent in any of this. They all behave very badly. But at different stages throughout the story, you feel sympathetic towards them for different reasons, and so they all become likable to some extent. Killmonger is an extremely popular villain in the MCU because he's extremely proactive and he's extremely competent. There's also an element of him being fairly sympathetic. We don't necessarily agree with all of the violent tactics that he is using, but you're like, man, you got a point. And so the way that you make a villain likable is the same way that you make any other villain likable. And if your villain is too likable, look at those three sliders and delete one of them from the story or slide it the opposite direction. And so we rarely see like bumbling incompetent villains anymore. That usually is like reserved for kids stories, although you're going to find exceptions to this, particularly in older stories. So remove one of these sliders from the page so that we don't see it, or adjust one of those sliders to make your villain less likable if that's what you are going for. If you're like, oh my gosh, my villain has overtaken my story and has become much more likable than my protagonist, look at those sliders, adjust them on your protagonist, adjust them on your villain in order to make them make sense for the story that you are trying to tell.